So, Bill Barrich, you wrote for The New Yorker for 15 years. I mean, this is the stable of J.D. Salinger, James Thurber. How did you come to be contributing a column on racing and sport?
Well, I set out to write a book about racing. It's a book called Laughing in the Hills. I was an aspiring writer. I'd been writing novels that were being rejected with sort of extraordinary regularity. And it occurred to me if I could write a book. People said, you know, he's not a bad writer. He just doesn't know how to tell a story. And I thought if I could find a non-fiction subject, then I wouldn't have to do that. The story would be there for me. And I decided I'd always had an interest in racing. And I thought, what if I just immerse myself in that subculture and go and literally live at a racetrack for 10 weeks during a meeting in California and see what I come up with. And I came up with boxes and boxes of notes. I was very fortunate because, as probably everybody here knows, racetrackers are not the most open people. You know, when you walk by the barn, they don't say, "Hi, how are you? I'd like to talk to you." You know, it's more like a grunt and, you know. But I became a kind of fly on the wall, and my generally inoffensive presence, they got used to me, and then they'd begin to talk. So I had all this material and worked it into a book and sent it to my agent in New York, who said, we should try sending this to The New Yorker. And much to my surprise, because the fellow who was then the editor, William Shawn, hated sports of all kinds, had breathed a sigh of relief. A.J. Liebling, who was their boxing writer, he loved Liebling, thought he was a wonderful writer, but he hated boxing. And he thought when Liebling passed away, then he would never again have that sport in the magazine. But to everyone's surprise, he liked the book, and he decided that he would run it in the magazine. So I went from, I was living very cheaply in a trailer, a mobile home in the wine country of California, to being published by The New Yorker. So it was kind of like through the looking glass, and a very nice transition, I must say.
Indeed. So you wrote for The New Yorker for 15 years. You've written Laughing in the Hills. You've written a book on following Irish racing.
Irish racing.
I want to try and sort of sum this up. You're a man of letters. You're a storyteller, and you found racing as your muse. What is it about racing? What does it have that you think makes it a worthy muse?
Well, it's that notion of a confined universe. You know, these people, that's what we tried to do with Luck. You know, that their lives are absolutely enmeshed with the horse, you know, with the circumstance of seeing the same people and having to deal with the same people on a day-to-day basis. But it's also got that first book. The reason I got so taken with racing was my mother was dying of cancer, and I would go home to see her on Long Island, and it was one of those hopeless situations. And one day I took a walk and I went by an off-track betting parlor, and I went in and I made a bet for fun. And in those days they didn't have replays on TV, but I'm sorry, they had replays, but they would be late in the afternoon. And much to my surprise, my mother, who dissuaded us from ever gambling, started watching. And for a brief moment, the cancer kind of disappeared. And there was that spark of life, you know, that occurs in the minute or two of a race that still, you know, transports me. And I thought, well, maybe there's something special about that. And that was part of what set me on that investigation, and part of what has kept me, wherever you travel. When I met my wife, who's Irish, and moved to Dublin, I thought, the Irish, I mean, they're worse than I am. They are absolutely obsessed with horses. And that would be another thing. It would be a way to write about, not only about Irish racing, but about Irish culture, society, what's going on in Ireland. So it's been a portal for me that would take me in many different directions. And it's also, you know, racing is a great democracy. I can remember being in Barbados writing a travel piece, and I found somehow a racetrack. And it was great because there were the Bajans with dreadlocks, you know, along with the old colonials, and they were all sharing tips, you know, and saying, did you see what happened in that race, you know? So I like that aspect of racing too. And then there's the horse, and one of the things that Don struck me was when that first book was published, I got letters. In those days, actually, people wrote to writers, and I would say at least 2/3 of them were people wanting to share their story about how they got involved in racing. And inevitably, it began, I had an uncle, a father, an aunt, somebody who took them to the races when they were a child. And, you know, when you're a child, they're not interested in the gambling aspect, but they love the horse, you know, and I agree with Don, that's the thing that's got to be sold, you know, through popular culture, it's the thing that keeps people involved, you know, beyond the gambling aspect.
I want to draw in Chris and Gerald. Now, I know you've got some slides prepared, but I want to do this slightly differently. What I'd like to do is to frame this and explain to the audience why I invited you. Because I'm aware of what you've achieved in New Zealand, and I think it's something that should be understood throughout the Asian Racing Federation, because I think it's a beacon. I think it's an example. Now, tell us the story. When did you start the Hall of Fame?
The Hall of Fame in New Zealand really resonated from a discussion that Gerald and I had at the Adelaide Races in Australia in May of 2003. And I'd been to the Aussie Hall of Fame event some days before, loved what I saw, you know. Australians have a habit of inducting New Zealanders into their Hall of Fame, and we've actually done the same thing on a reciprocal basis. But I love the stories, and I saw Gerald at the races the following few days later, had a good discussion. We were quite thrilled to know that the Aussie Hall of Fame directors were at the table beside us, and you know, from that acorn really a oak tree developed. And it just resonated from there.
Now, Gerald, I know how persuasive Chris is. I've seen him, you know, arguing with the Treasurer of Australia about how GST should work for racing. Did it take much convincing?
Certainly not for me. I've always been involved with thoroughbreds all my life. My father before me, so I was always keen on the history of racing. And when this opportunity arose to be involved and to create something for posterity and for future generations to enjoy, I was very happy to become involved.
And you saw a vacuum. You saw that there was a history there that should be conserved for posterity. What also I think is so interesting about what you've done is that you haven't adopted in whole the traditional bricks and mortar model of saying, build a museum, appoint a curator, assemble what you've got in terms of historical artefacts, explain it, and then wait for people to come. Instead, you've done something very, very different. What is that?
Well, we really had a motive to develop a digital media strategy to actually capture our inductees' stories in a film content. I reckon a film tells 1,000 words. It resonates well with young people. We were very, very fortunate to put together a fantastic media team, and they're still with us today. And I don't think people have totally appreciated the quality of our film. You know, we have them at our National Museum, and just getting them there, you know, pitching to our National Museum curators at Te Papa it took a period of time. It really developed. We have the Phar Lap. Phar Lap was a champion, a New Zealand-bred horse who was a champion racehorse in Australia and America. We have his skeleton on display at Te Papa in Wellington, and it was bear. It was a bear and barren horse sitting in a glass cage with skeleton bones. We had a story to accompany the horse with, and our pitch took a period of time, but in 2010, the Victorian government knocked on the door of Te Papa and said, look, we would like to have the skeleton back as part of the 150th celebrations to honour the Melbourne Cup. And I think that basically demonstrated to them the quality of the exhibit they had. And thereafter, they thought, well, we're going to have an empty box. What can we do to carry on the story? So they rang and said, look, we'd love to have the story. So our inductee film clip for Farlap was running 24/7. And they rang me sometime later and said, we've been absolutely amazed at the reaction of particularly young people coming through and watching this film. You know, they were just mesmerised by the story. Because it's not just a New Zealand story, it's an Australian story and an American story.
Gerald, you've got something to add there?
I have. I just wanted to explain the background, a little bit more of the background, because we did make a conscious decision that we wouldn't create a Hall of Fame as such, as one might imagine a Hall of Fame is. We haven't got a home, but we do induct every second year. We have a function, a glamour function, a gala function. We induct about 10 inductees, and we develop, each inductee, we develop a DVD of their history, of their life. It may be, it's about 2 or 3 minutes in total. And we spread the difference between both horses and people, old and new. So we keep a balance amongst those 10 that we induct each year, which has been part of the success of the event, because people come to that event to watch, to see who may be inducted that year. And there are obviously representatives of people, living people. Some of the older horses and people have very few representatives, but we need that balance to encourage our audience to be there. We've gone back to some of the great horses, Carbine, Farlap, Chris mentioned, right through to Sunline today, and there's 57 of them in total. They're offered free to anybody who wants to use them. They're on our website, but our television station, our trackside, our racing channel uses them regularly as fillers, and we'll often see when there's a break in racing, some of these our Hall of Fame inductees will come up. And I'm something that I'm very proud of, and I think it's something that's very easy to develop. And I would like to think that some countries, and I know a lot of older racing countries than us, have not got a Hall of Fame or anything that preserves their history. And all I can say is that with the passage of time, a lot of those stories are going to disappear forever. And I think there's a responsibility on present-day administrators to actually create something like we have done.
Thank you, Gerald. And on that note, I think I'll draw the discussion to a close. I want to share with you that through Chris and Gerald's generosity, they've prepared a DVD that's available to all the delegates. We'll provide that to you that shows you. So you'll see firsthand just what they've created here.